Hello, pilots, and welcome to episode 8 of the Ramjet Anvil show. I'm Zalvier Nelson Jr., the developer of All Hail Spider God, Mazurka, A Ghost in Italy, and Screw You Beodad, and today I'm very happy to be joined by my colleague and one of the lead developers of the Volo Airsport development team, Martin.
Hey, that's me.
If you've been following the show for a while, you'd know that we also usually have Frank with us. He's another one of the lead developers on the game, but due to some unfortunate stuff, he cannot be with us today. However, we do look forward to his glorious prophesied return next week. This week, we're actually doing something that we've wanted to get to for a while, and we read all, people say creative people don't read the comments. We read your comments, and we listen to them quite actively, in fact, and we discuss it before we record and plan shows. And this week, we read a couple of comments in our last video that were so fascinating that we decided to do an entire episode about it. So, of course, keep those comments coming. And Luc Sommerland in particular, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, said, will the game still be fantasy looking in the end? Or are you going for a realistic sports simulation now? And one user's response to that, Coconut FPV, says, define realistic simulation. Because game can be a realistic simulation with wonky, cartoonish, or Minecraft-like graphics. And me and Martin actually discussed those comments before planning this week's show, and we realized, man, when applied to games or really any artistic medium, there isn't really a binary choice there between realism and fantasy, right?
That's completely true. And in fact, a lot of game design and simulation design is diving into this very question and seeing, well, what are all the kinds of different ways that I can even understand this question? Because it's a big one once you start looking into it. There is at least one thing you can say is making something that's purely realistic on a computer. What does that mean? Does that mean it's completely natural or completely photo-like? There's limits to computers, and there's limits to what you can put in them, and you have to think a lot about how you take stuff from the real world and put it on computers. You can take some stuff over, make it look like the real thing, but it ends somewhere. And where is that line? And then how do you choose those individual parts, and how do you translate them?
So to provide,
and for what reason, too?
So to provide specific fantasies, you have to really look at the design choices that are enabling them, even in games that seem realistic.
Yes, exactly. And there's always this choice you have to make. There's at least one. But if you start looking into that one, it's just a long string of choices. Is this interesting? Is that interesting? No? Why? And maybe sometimes you'll change your mind on this and go, you know what? We should actually be able to set wingsuits on fire in the game, but for now it doesn't seem that important to us, so perhaps we shouldn't simulate the ability to be able to set stuff on fire. That type of thing. Consequences being, of course, that if your wingsuits can never be set on fire, they're not technically realistic, maybe, with respect to the real world, but as long as the aerodynamics still pan out and you can fly with them, really, what's the problem? What's the harm? That's the choice that you make.
It's in a digital world. We have, last month, actually, we played Pilot Wings, and we showed that off.
Yes.
Live on stream, and we got to discuss some really interesting things as a result. And the interesting thing about Pilot Wings 64 is it has a very hardcore simulation combined with a hardcore simulation, but they combined that not only with a cartoony aesthetic, but the game itself you could see, especially at that time, at that point in gaming, we didn't have the technology to do some of the amazing things we can now. They had to choose where to prioritize. And
yes.
As we've continued to have more RAM to mess with, more powerful graphics cards to render our virtual realities, both actual virtual reality and just the fancy schmancy term I just used right now. you see developers still have to find those focus points, that needs
Yeah.
to focus on what is interesting, what makes the game we're building better, hasn't gone away whatsoever.
A great example of this too, that is very near and dear to my heart, and I think in terms of Volo Airsport, the inspiration's also a big one, like Pilot Wings, is SSX snowboarding. It's snowboarding on computers, or on console specifically, and it's done in a larger-than-life way. Some things about snowboarding they capture really well, just the overall feel of doing a slalom over a slope with soft snow on it, using a snowboard. They get the feeling of that across quite well, but they're also a video game, and there's clear limits to what their simulation does in terms of realism, and it's under the hood. If you ignore the animation of the characters, it's quite a simple model. And they realized this is not quite like real life, but where's the problem in that? It's okay, right? It's a fun little snowboarding game. So they just ran with it.
They embraced that. And
yeah, they embraced that fully.
A really prime example that is really hard to overlook, where you can see the realism and fantasy points sort of mesh together, is in the particle trails that follow your character's hands and the lines of your board.
Yeah, they're completely ridiculous. They shouldn't exist according to whatever quote-unquote realistic standards that we have. But I'm very happy that they're there, because you know what? I can't feel what that character on that snowboard on that screen is feeling in terms of how that rotation is working out for them. And I can see them do it, but if those particle trails weren't there, I just get less information about what they're going through. But now that those trails are there, I get kind of, in an instant, I can see the history of their movement. I can sort of see the swirls and the rotations that happened even a second ago. And that gives me a much fuller, yet very intuitive picture of what is actually happening. And that means I can just, as long as I know what those lines represent, those little trails that follow them, it tells me so much more than me just looking at a clean picture.
And it also...
So that's a...
Oh, sorry to interrupt
ahead.
you, but it also removes the need for a standard meter of some kind telling you the same information, but in a boring bar or graph. It tells you the same information intuitively.
Oh, God, yeah. You know what really... what really does it for me all the time? The excitement I get when I read flowcharts and graphs on how fast my wingsuit went or how fast my snowboard went. It's nice extra information for some kinds of analysis, just going, well, how well did I actually do?
But if you can actually feel it...
But yes, and that's so much more important to me right now. If that isn't there, I don't care about the graph after it that says, well, you went 500 meters in this many seconds. I don't care. I care about the way it felt.
And to use, of course, SSX is meant to be over the top, and that's part of why people love it so much. But a prime example of something that, well, a design decision that was enabled to allow specific fantasies to even be possible in the gaming realm, that many people don't think about, is the addition of crosshairs and hit sounds in an FPS.
Yeah. If you've played something like Overwatch or even far further back Quake, or there's also Call of Duty, which does this. If you're playing a multiplayer game and you're shooting at someone, you get this. If you hit correctly, the server tells you from wherever it lives in the real world, it tells you actually hit this thing or this person. You get a little abstract boop or whatever the sound designers chose for it.
Ding, ding, ding,
and
ding, ding, ding.
Well, yeah, actually, they should try that one. But yeah, that sound, you get that sound a little bit after you saw whatever projectile you fired actually hit that thing. But it's there to tell you, hey, even though there's latency, there's lag, as all these computers are communicating with each other, this actually hit. So it's completely abstract in a sense that it doesn't behave like a real bullet would, but it still feels really good. And if it turns out if you take this away, if you take this hit sound away, it'll start feeling very arbitrary. Like, did I hit? Did I not hit? And you could say that's more realistic.
And some games actually do this. I will point out just that some games actually do this to great effect, and it works for them.
Yes, because then it becomes obvious that they're wanting to play with that ambiguity and the tension in there. Like, did I hit that? Did I not? That's an interesting situation to deal with, but it depends on the type of design that you're doing and the experience that you're trying to create, what you find important. So hit sounds yes, sometimes hit sounds no, other times it's a choice.
And that's the critical point. It is a choice, but it's not a choice of this or that. It's more a choice of where do we want to fall on this spectrum on a variety of issues. Because for some, Volo Airsport is a prime example. Just to bring it back to Volo Airsport, in some regards, it is one of the most realistic simulation type games I've played. Primarily in the fact that, like most realistic simulation games, I die within a couple of minutes. But on
that's okay. That happens to everybody.
Okay, that's good to know I'm not alone in that. But in other regards, Volo really is a bit fantastical, and that fantastic element really, or not the fantastic element, but
it's true though. There is a fantastic element to it.
Well, I'm trying to think of a word that isn't fantastic, because fantastic also means just great.
Tolkien-esque.
That would be the nerdiest possible thing. Yeah, it's good to know I'm not alone in it's good to know I'm not alone in the whole dying thing. But in some ways, it can be a very realistic simulation of aerodynamics and how that affects your body. But in other ways, you can see some points of that simulation just aren't there. They've been removed, or they simply weren't added to focus really on the principal points of the simulation, which is enabling the feeling, the core feeling, hairs standing up on the back of your neck, tension in your back of flight. And that's so important, but also so difficult when it comes to defining where that line is, because all of it really is needed, and it all is essentially comes to the exact same point. They come together.
Yeah. And here's an interesting thing to bring up that or a thing that we should have been showing, and some people have seen this, but we should be showing this off a lot more because it's really great material. We're looking at concept art right now that we've done with a Dutch studio by our friends Diana and Janice, who did concept art for the game. We asked them, can you help us visualize what we want this actual baby to look like in a way that becomes coherent and will guide us as we make new technology and we get other people to make 3D assets for us. We need, at the very least, we need a style book. But when we started talking about this, we really had no idea how we wanted the game to look. But we knew that they had a really interesting view on this. And so even though they really hadn't done much game concepting work before, if at all, we knew they were great artists, and we were just very curious about the view they'd have on this thing. And they came up with stuff like this almost right out of the gates. I love this. This is not a wingsuit that you can buy in a shop right now, but it's one of the most stylish ones I've ever seen. And I can't quite make out the material that it's made out of, but I can imagine it working. And then we started getting into stranger stuff because we didn't give them too many limits other than, well, limbs have to be roughly human-sized and suit has to be roughly human-sized, that type of thing. And so we come up with these suits where the material choice in question is even less clear, and you could say less realistic because it's just sort of any type of science fiction material that you'd want. But this stuff could glow, and glowing and other, call them fantastical elements, can be used to communicate stuff. Like the pressure in the wings? That's an important one to know. Or is this wing almost stalling? How much stress is there on this? How fast am I going? Suddenly we have suits that can visually communicate this kind of stuff in a way that's a little bit more clear than realistic wingsuits.
Almost like the suit in Dead Space, which is a really removed
it's a great point.
thing to mention, but yeah, that concept of integrated UI and further increasing player immersion by combining the UI into the actual experience itself. You see that even in bigger realistic AAA games now.
Yeah, it's completely correct. There's more stuff here. They thought of a lot of potential things that we need to visualize. For example, we all have hair, and our characters ideally will also have hair, little bits. And there's a lot of wind, and wind and hair interact really freely, right? We all know that. It's a really complex thing to model and animate, and they have their own view on this, but just imagine for a second an engine that can render this convincingly. In terms of what they've actually drawn, there's not that much actually happening. It's just they chose their shapes and the way they animated them really cleverly, and it looks really convincing. So we've been looking at this going, this is not completely realistic hair, because it's cartoony, and it doesn't look photorealistic, but in the way it behaves, it is much more realistic than anything I've seen with photorealistic hair rendering in games. So couldn't we do something like this that looks, in one way, super stylish, and stylized, I should say, but in the way it behaves and the way it moves around in response to the wind actually looks far more realistic than anything we've been able to do thus far. And I'm not going to tell you that that's done or that I have an exact idea of how that should look in code and how we're going to actually animate all this, but when we're considering how to do characters in Volo Airsport and put them on screen, that's the type of question we ask ourselves. Because we could just go to a 3D modeler and go, we're working with Unity 3D, I know you work with Blender, could you just make us a polygonal character model with textures and animation and all that baked in? Give it to us and then we can put it in the game. It wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't. Just because the pipeline and the technology aren't set up to do this, not actually this.
And actually, as you've described in previous episodes, things like the features found in the parachute update where you can dynamically change the shape of the parachute and how that operates just procedurally and have it work. That stuff isn't possible with a rigid 3D traditional character model.
Yeah. And so that's where we're a little bit, I'll just call us goofy young people or tools. We're a bit nutty. Because usually when studios go, well, this concept art looks nice, but we can't translate that directly into our game engine, that's the point where we stop. Where the concept art, it still has some sort of guiding function, but what you get in the game is not actually going to look significantly like what you had in the concept art. And you lose stuff in translation there so easily. So here's another problem. User-generated content, and it's good that you brought up the parachutes. Parachutes are now, in our game, user-generated content, and we want it to stay that way. We want that to grow, that whole aspect of it.
Especially because the creation of that content is very easily done, so people can easily create and share and modify parachutes that they've downloaded.
Yeah, so the problem with that is, if we then ask a 3D modeler, a 3D artist who has worked on other games, can you give us a model for a parachute? Well, then we get one model for one specific parachute, which doesn't match exactly all of the parachutes that you can create with this system. So we need something slightly different. And the same thing is true for the characters. Ideally, we want to also give you this type of customization on your character, with specifically the wingsuit that they're wearing. We'd love to do that. But if we just go the route of hiring a 3D artist and say, hey, give us a character model with a default suit on, then that's sort of it for that model. The only thing we can do with that model is render exactly that model. If we want to do it differently and we want to add more flexibility to the system so you can change it more while you're playing the game, then we need to do something else, and we really need to think about it. That's where this concept art has been so important, in really forcing us to think about these hard problems and not go with easy solutions that in the future, it turns out, really limit what we can do.
And how close we can get to providing that fantasy of flight.
Yes!
So, really summing that up, the science and the artistry go hand in hand.
That is a great way to put it. It's, the two are not separate, or at least you can see science as a separate thing. You can see art as a separate thing, but one without the other will probably not get you where you want to go. They have to, exactly like you said, they have to go hand in hand and work together. And only that is how we're going to get this game to be a flying experience that you haven't had before. So that's the whole point. If we're making a flight experience that it turns out you've already had before with a slightly different look on it, then that's not interesting for us to do. That's a waste of our time. We want to give it a good shot at something that's actually new.
So you have a sense of craft there in the authorial intent, and an appreciation for really realism and the benefits it offers. Volo, of course, you said it's a flight experience. We want to provide one that's different than any other you experienced, and a lot of that comes through in the realism of the aerodynamics and etc., and how that's made possible by really doing the whole kooky thing you have right now, dealing with the capsules and the physics models and the modifiable parachutes, and finding, okay, where and how can we make this possible? Because right now, a lot of people say, and it's very common, and it's definitely true, at a certain point you have to finish the thing, and you have to say, okay, we can't do anymore. We have to do some sort of compromise. But right now, especially thanks to the audience support, that's made really even continued development possible. We can afford to take the time to say, we're going to take as much time as we need to make sure this is done right, and it's done to a level that the community deserves.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we talk about this and that we coordinate this between all of us as we grow the game and play the game together. Because there is a lot we can actually do as long as we just make the right decisions as to creative process. But if we keep letting ourselves be led by, we gotta have a character model now, just do it the way it's always been done, then we're gonna be chopping off entire roads that we could have gone down in the future that are ultimately where the best version of this game lies. And to the extent that we can today already say, well, if we go this way, that's probably not going to work out, even though that is really where we want to go, then that's probably not a good idea. So, yeah, let's try and point this thing in the right direction. Use this concept art as a guide. Keep talking about this nebulous area between realism and fantasy, and see where they are both pointing, because that's probably a very nice place to be. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Volo Airsport is available today on Steam and itch.io, and you can get the link in the description. Also, you can click right here on the screen through the magic of editing and go to the website and get it there. Your financial support is incredibly important to us, and it lets us do all this amazing stuff and even think about doing this fancy character rendering stuff. So thank you.
And of course, the community aspect is what made episodes like this possible. We directly looked at your comments and said, how can we respond to that? And expand upon it in a really valuable way. So, of course, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, tell your friends, and really get in here. Ah!
I'm keeping that in. I'm keeping that in.
And get in here. We need you. So feel free to like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, and come into the community so we can really come together and find this magic point and make the game as great as it can be.
Exactly. All right. See you next time.
Till next time, pilots.
Just